Perfect. Well, great. Since we are past 6, maybe let's go ahead and get started. I've got a couple introductory remarks, and then we'll go ahead with some questions. Um, so thank you everybody for joining us tonight. My name is Adrienne Rentz. I'm a first year master's student at the Divinity School here at UChicago, and I'm one of the program assistants for the Office of Spiritual Life. Our panel tonight comes at a critical point in the quarter for many of us, tying up loose ends on different assignments and beginning to look at our finals weeks. So tonight's discussion follows an email series from earlier in the quarter called The Ritual of Living that discussed how to find meaning in the mundane, especially as we face the 1-year anniversary of a pandemic that has disrupted many of our former conceptions about what is meaningful. So tonight, I hope to position that conversation specifically in the life of a student. So speaking on this topic, it is my great joy to introduce all 3 of our panelists, Sean Willard, Elizabeth Webb, and Helen Dixon. Sean is a first-year Master of Divinity student, here at UChicago, and is a wealth of knowledge for all things Chinese medicine and holistic healing. Elizabeth is an Assistant Director of Wellbeing Initiatives for UChicago Student Wellness and has an impressive background in mental health and mindfulness, pioneering UChicago's Better Together program. And Helen is an interdisciplinary scholar in the fields of religion, history, and Near Eastern studies, and is currently a professor at East Carolina University, as well as a dear former professor of mine from Wofford College. So by way of such brief introductory remarks, I can assure you all that we are in especially good company as they sit on our panel tonight. And at the risk of being a corny Zoom moderator, I'd love it if you all would join me in giving these 3 a virtual round of applause.
Nice command of the Zoom emojis. Yeah.
So as students at UChicago juggling a full academic schedule, it can feel difficult to maintain a sense of purpose and meaning in the mix of approaching papers and exams. So tonight, from 3 different perspectives, that of a student, an administrator, and a professor, we'll have the chance to consider meaning making in the world of academia and how mindfulness practices and perspectives on spirituality can help us to do that. So, by way of beginning our conversation, I will ask a couple of questions for each of our panelists to speak to. And toward the end of our time, if we have a bit of time left, I'll open up the floor for some Q&A. So I'll begin by directing our first question to you, Elizabeth, and invite Helen and Sean to comment as well. So Elizabeth, as you work with many students at UChicago, I'm sure you are well acquainted with students dealing with the overwhelm of assignments, deadlines, extracurricular commitments, and just generally a full schedule. So what are some insights you can offer on how to manage the demands of schoolwork and a full schedule while also incorporating mental health check-ins, moments of spiritual, mindful reflection? I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. So I think, definitely being mindful of how you feel physically, mentally, and emotionally is just so important. I think paying attention to what your body and mind need, and then allowing yourself to give yourself what you need is truly crucial to not burning out. I think especially as a student, as much as it might seem like there's no time for breaks are just so important for your mental health and well-being. And even just 5 minutes to walk away from what you're doing, taking a moment to even walk around the block, get some fresh air, taking a hot shower can just help reset your mind and your body and just help you get refocused so that you can continue on. We are not robots. And I don't think we should aspire to be, and we all need to rest and recharge. And doing so actually will help you achieve more in the long run. So for me, finding a really simple, quick, mindful breathing activity works really well, especially if you feel yourself getting overwhelmed or distracted. Just taking note of that, of what's really going on in your mind or your body, taking a few deep breaths, focusing on how breathing feels in your body, and then just focusing on, what is important to you in this moment, even as something as simple as that can just help you reset and refocus. So I would also just say I'm a huge proponent of like nature therapy. So if you can get outside, even just for a few minutes, absolutely do that.
Yeah, that's great. What about Helen and Sean? What do you have to say?
Maybe we can end on the student perspective for maximum impact. Maybe some of you guys are like me. When I was a grad student, I heard advice like that and I was like, okay, take more breaks. And I put it on my to-do list as something I needed to achieve in addition to all the things I have to do today. I have to take 4 breaks. And it stressed me out a little bit. And I think it really took me, I mean, I almost want to commend you guys for being in something like this. I think a lot of us get here because we end up in crisis, like we end up physically sick or we end up totally collapsing. And then we start caring about work-life balance in a different way. And what I would caution you or urge you to hear in Elizabeth's very good advice is that quality of time that she's talking about, the break time, is totally different time. It's not a task you are accomplishing, it's playtime. And if you struggle with viewing them as equal, I need to complete this translation and I also need to take a break. I urge you to think back to when you were a kid. What's something that really got you excited, lost, made you feel treated, in spoiled little kid? And think about those as your breaks. They don't have to look like everybody's breaks. I also love walks around the block, but I also so like a fire in the fireplace that if I put on Netflix screensaver video of a fire in a fireplace, I feel awesome. And I'm not embarrassed about it anymore. I'm almost 40, okay? And that's what I like. And so, that's the kind of thing you can allow your breaks to be weird, to be specific to you. Anything that allows you to breathe out, giggle a little, a bowl of Fruit Loops, anything that feels right to you can be your break time. It should feel very different from the other tasks in your list.
I love the Fruit Loop analogy and accepting the weirdness and play. I think all those are things that we don't generally get to do as you are supposedly, maturing. And whether you're like undergrad, grad, PhD, I almost feel like there's a certain decorum of studiousness, right? Or how you're supposed to play into these spaces. And I think that's a big thing that's kind of happening even more in the microcosm of the Zoom world, where we were kind of mentioning at the beginning of this, no one wants to come into the meeting before, because it's like, are you going to be dark and go on your black screen? Or are you going to be on mute? And so there's almost a lot of extra layers of showing up in the world that you didn't have to do before. And I think for me, one of the biggest things is, where can you drop those layers? Where can you be most vulnerable? Where can you be unafraid and unabashedly yourself? And I think that's really where break and rest and mindfulness can sit in, because then it allows you to not be the multitasker, to not be having to manage so many things at once, and you just do a singular thing. And to reference the emails that Adrian sent, I think whether you do that through touch, whether you do that through sound, smell, movement, my biggest thing has always been diversifying. So as you kind of gave in my introduction, I've kind of gotten an eclectic view of the holistic and Eastern medicine, Western medicine viewpoint. So educating yourself, like, this is not necessarily going to help you maybe this week or this term, but in the long run, where can you find your language, your play that suits you, that you can go to repeatedly to soothe yourself, rather than maybe following models of any one of the things that the three of us panelists say. I think that's also important too is this sense of like self-discovery within mindfulness and within the concepts of when you can have that peace of mind and break and breath.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I've seen something recently about we don't grow old because we don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. And I think that's true in academia, that we begin to take ourselves a bit too seriously. And then mental health goes out the window because it has to be a certain way. So yeah, following up on what you said, Sean, I'm curious, are there ways that you've found that religion and spirituality or mindfulness more broadly have provided tools for you for dealing with overwhelm or burnout with school?
I would say the most important thing is knowing myself. So I don't ascribe to a specific religious or spiritual tradition. I've kind of picked and chose what I resonated with over time, but all that came back to what works for me. And in my Chinese medicine program, there was a lot of Taoism involved. And so we talked about yin and yang. And I think yin being the sense of like rest and recovery is devalued in our society in a certain way. Like we're always achieving, we're always striving. And so for me, honoring what can be slow, what can be methodical, what can literally be nothing has brought me a lot of respite in times that have been struggling, and sort of reorienting your value system on not just go, 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 do. So one of the examples, I used to always be an athlete. So everything that I would do in terms of exercise was my movement form of relief, was highly exertional. And then coming into learning about yoga or Tai Chi and Qigong, where you have much more of these slow, easygoing movements corresponding with the breath. So you can still say that you did movement, but now it's in a different form. Also, I think religion and spirituality gives you these different senses of like acknowledgement, whether that's through the community that you're involved with, whether that's in the sense of someone truly seeing who you are because that's a portion of your identity. Also, for myself personally, like realizing how small I am in the grand scheme of things, and how also small some of the big things that we think are crises moments in the long trajectory of your life maybe don't mean as much as we think they do. And I think one of the last things is to this sense of like release or purging. So for me, sound, right? Some people don't always want to talk out their problems. So whether you're like singing in a choir, or whether you're chanting some mantra, or whether you're toning, I think there's a way in which practices like movement and sound have really allowed me to let go a lot of anything that's sort of bottled up.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious, Elizabeth, since you work specifically with mindfulness practices, what kind of habits or practices have you found that are really useful for students?
Yeah, so for me personally, and something that I think I've gotten feedback from students on as well, is with mindfulness practices. The biggest thing for me with helping me not feel overwhelmed or dealing with burnout or just dealing with like difficult emotions and thoughts is that when I've been able to practice mindfulness and like truly practice it, it helps me separate myself from those emotions and thoughts and sort of see them as something outside of myself, which helps me not get caught up in them and carried away by them. And so, I mean, that's easy to say, but I mean, it takes a lot of practice, but it has been honestly like life changing in some ways for me, because I'm a very emotional person, and it can be very easy for me to get caught up in emotions and even just difficult situations that I'm in. And so when I practice to see like this is something just like everything else in life that will come and go, and it just gives me so much more perspective on the situation. So that's like the biggest thing for me.
Mhm. So have you gotten feedback from students trying that?
Yeah, I think that's one, you know, we use there's a lot of metaphors in everything, I guess, but in the meditation class that I teach, and I'm sure many of you have heard this before, but we talk a lot about how the mind is like a rushing river, right? You can't ever stop it. And the point is not to stop it. You like, you know, you don't want thoughts not to come into your head. That won't happen. But if you can sort of sit on the side of the river and watch them float by, it can be really useful versus getting just carried downstream. And I think that that resonates with a lot of students. I think once they're even just the idea of like thoughts and emotions being separate from who you are, I think can be really powerful for people when they even just hear that maybe for the first time. And then practicing that and holding that, I think can be really, again, just really powerful for people. Make them feel more in control, I think, too, because I think that is a really big key when you're struggling, is feeling out of control.
Yeah, and I definitely think that's true in the case of burnout or being overwhelmed by school. You kind of become a victim to your own schoolwork, and
Abs-
that's a useful tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just schoolwork, you know, the pressures of all the other things that students are involved in. And if you're and I think a lot of students too have families and sometimes children and all these other things going on that like we don't often think of when we think of like the typical student. And so everyone has all of these other things going on, that just sort of compound, and it can be really tough.
Right. And Helen, I feel like you have a unique position where you get to be in the classroom with students struggling with all of that. So I wonder, how do you see those practices manifested in students? How do you recommend them?
Yeah, this is something I think about all the time. I teach ancient religion, and one of the main principles I want to get across to my students is empathy for individuals from the past, right? It's really fun and exciting to learn about mummies and magic and crazy spells and what people did. But I want people to realize that that stuff worked for those people, right? Those rituals worked, and we can call it the placebo effect if we want, because the placebo effect works, right? Placebo works really well. I think I can't remember, Adrian, you were in a class of mine. I think one of the first articles I assigned was about a guy who commissions writer's block pills. Yeah, so this is like he's absolutely aware that he's purchasing for $400 some placebo pills, and he sits with a guy who wears a lab coat and is like, okay, what colors do you associate with writing? And he's like, gold. And he's like, okay, we can't make a gold pill. How about yellow? Does that work for you? Yellow? And he's like, yellow. Okay. And they work together and they make this pill and they put it in a bottle and they sell him the bottle, and they know it is sugar pills. And every time he takes one of those pills, he's more productive. It doesn't matter if you know it's fake. What matters is you have bought into the system of symbols surrounding the ritual practice. So it worked for him because he believes in doctors. He has taken pills before. He knows authority rests in the specialist. He understands what it means to take a pill and feel relief about 20 to 30 minutes later when he takes ibuprofen or whatever. That same placebo will not work for someone in ancient Israel in the year 1000 BC, but something else will that is part of his world system. And so this, I found as just a person who lives in the world, very exciting, freeing news in a way. right? We can craft our own mind-body connection, keeping in mind placebo is a kind of power we have. And so one of the things I've been experimenting with this semester that I mentioned to Adrienne when we were planning this, this panel, I've asked my students to design their own daily ritual as another kind of, practicing what we're reading about. Their ritual, though, is supposed to be intentional for their lives. And the way I asked them to do it is something they could do every day. So probably attached to waking up, going to bed, or a meal time, something that every day has, no matter what kind of a day it is. It has to engage 3 of their senses. So they might light a candle, which can be sight and also smell. It also has to involve words they say or read. So if they live with roommates, I don't want them to feel embarrassed saying magic words, but something intentional. And they're supposed to think hard in the planning of their ritual about what they want to achieve, what their intention is. So even though this isn't related to a god or goddess they're worshiping necessarily, it's a way to allow your brain something it wants to do anyway. Our brains love to go on autopilot. We love routine, right? Anytime we can phone it in, let's just walk into that room. We'll be fine. And you walk in the room and you're like, what was I doing in here? Right? Your brain took over, it went into autopilot, it got you there. Your brain is looking for opportunities to do that all the time. So building some intentionality into our rituals, I think even when we end the day feeling stressed out, feeling like I didn't accomplish enough, I didn't do enough of my writing, as soon as your brain sets into that 5-step ritual you've designed for going to bed, where I put on my favorite song and I do a little dance while I'm getting my comfy PJs on and I have a candle going, and then I say, we're going to sleep well tonight, and I blow out the candle. We're robots in a very lovely way. So I think ritual has a lot of potential. Ritual in that placebo spectrum has a lot of potential for academic minds to connect with their bodies and to connect with a kind of mindful intentionality.
Yeah, I think that's so cool to think about for like a going to bed ritual, because I've seen so many things about your morning routine being critical for the rest of your day, and this idea of micro stressors. You wake up and you check your phone and you read a hard news article, or you see that you have 30 emails that you already need to answer before you've even gotten out of bed. So yeah, I think it's really cool that you can add that sort of ritual at any point in your day, and it's kind of a grounding practice to bring you back to that moment. So yeah, following up on that with you, Helen, as a scholar and professor involved in academia, are there any habits or mindsets that you have found personally helpful in your own life for maintaining a sense of balance and meaningfulness for you, for the lives of your students, and kind of the onset of deadlines and everything else?
Yeah, I think there are 2 different answers I want to give. One from the perspective of being a faculty member with students. I wish I could give all of you guys a script to try on your faculty whenever you are facing periods of challenge. But I know that there are faculty out there with whom it is not safe to be vulnerable, with whom it is not a self-compassionate practice to say, hey, I just wanted to let you know that I struggle with anxiety, and I'm, right. It's there are still faculty who don't want to hear it. And I've had faculty like that. I know the devastation. It can, feel like, well, I'm a whole person. I'm not just my brain on a stick. But I think that you have an instinct with most people we meet, whether this person is going to be able to hear me, see me as a whole person. And, sometimes we misstep on these, but I encourage you, when you get a gut signal saying this person is safe, to right at the beginning of a semester and at any point in the semester, stay after class, come ahead of class, send a very short email just saying, hey, I wanted to loop you in and say, I'm really having a hard time balancing my work, and I'm doing my best, but I just wanted to let you know now, in case I look like I'm not contributing or I'm not getting my stuff done at full capacity. It doesn't have to be specific. I think that kind of reminding folks of your humanity, it's good practice in general, and it normalizes it for others, right? I try to do that with my own classes. I give everyone a mental health day where they don't have to come to class and they can choose when to take it. I try to incorporate periods in the semester that are usually very stressful, like midterms. I try to avoid scheduling stuff at that time. But I think it's worth thinking about in your own lives if you can craft more of that in as well, especially if you're doing things like writing a thesis where you're really the feudal lord in charge of your kingdom of time. Think about amping down intentionally. Think about taking 3-day breaks. Oh, it's a 3-day weekend, but it's Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Think about how you can be your sort of best time manager, not in terms of jamming efficiency into every corner, but in terms of setting a comfortable rhythm that you can, try one thing, see if it works for you, try another thing, see if it works for you. I know that about every 4 weeks, I need a little break of longer than a weekend. So this will be the second part of my answer. In my own life, I now never work longer than 2 hours at a time. That sounds so low. I mean, it still, to me, sounds like I should be embarrassed of that. But what I mean by that is every 2 hours, I notice my ability to concentrate, my ability to be present in my work crumbles anyway. I could sit there and keep trying, and I'd end up on Facebook. You know what I'm saying? So every 2 hours, I really stop. I schedule like that's now my lunch break, or that's when I take a walk, or that's when I have a phone call with a friend, and then I can come back in. So Elizabeth's initial suggestion is something I've incorporated. I also I schedule my writing time as if it were a meeting. So I don't tell people I'm in a meeting. You don't have to lie to folks, but you just say like, oh, I can't, Monday afternoons, I have a standing commitment. And that kind of just protecting stuff that you might need, including protecting playtime. I have certain nights every week that my husband and I don't hang out. We just have alone nights, and we just do our own thing. We make our own dinner. We don't plan anything together. There are just absolutely idiosyncratic personal things that I've started to weave into my weekly rhythm so that I feel like I have forced myself into a different mode of being. I am not my work. I am not my productivity accomplishments. And it's a lifelong thing. I think I'm even this year trying new stuff, I'm trying to incorporate more craft projects into my life this year. Sort of like Adrian's email note about doing things with your hands, right? So I don't mean to be vague, and I don't mean to be a laundry list, but I think that so much of this is about learning from doing and noticing, like you are an anthropological experiment. Oh, I don't seem to be able to focus for 6 hours at a time. You know what? That's not crazy. All right, let's see how long I can focus for. Oh, is it only 2 hours? Well, let's work on acceptance. That's where I'm at.
That's so good. And Sean, I wonder how you hear that as a student, if you apply any of those same tactics. I know you said sound meditation or chanting. I wonder, what are some of your practices? And then maybe what are some practices you could recommend to students that don't have experience with the world of spirituality that you've explored?
Well, first off, I just wanted to say thank you for Professor Helen, just mentioning the fact that, I would imagine you are someone that a student could go to and be very vulnerable with. And I think that's a super just key point to make, where it's not always present, whether that's in for an academic relationship, whether that's in a job relationship, whether that's in even a familial or partner relationship. And I think that spoke to me a little bit about what Elizabeth said earlier, like who we are outside of the academic field. And I think that's one of the big mindsets that I try to have is, even though I am highly indebted and a committed student to the University of Chicago in my programs and study, I had a life before this, I will have a life after this, and I have a life that's going on in tandem to that. So in terms of finding meaning, we don't always get, whether it's feedback on an assignment or a grade, or we have short-term or long-term projects where you can't get that sort of meaning back initially. And I think a lot of those spaces outside of school, if you can recommit to or get in contact with again, can offer that sense of remembering who you were, to kind of turn on that vibration, like that vibration in yourself of, okay, this is where I shine. In terms of actual practices, I think along with this concept of play that we've sort of been mentioning, is for me like redefining what selfish is. I think a lot of times that has such a negative connotation, and I know for times in my life that's been thrown at me, whether you have attachments to certain responsibilities, how can you at least once a day do something for yourself? A lot of us are very compassionate, giving, probably mindful people, but when do we do that for ourselves? So I think in terms of my experience as someone who's worked in healthcare, there's kind of always the do for others, but you never do for yourself. And I think that self-love is a large component. Specific examples, I take baths every week, at least once a week. I think another thing in terms of nature, if that's your thing, is huge. For example, I had some pretty unsettling news over the weekend. There was a death in my family, and I'm in Chicago, and I'm not there with the grieving party. So how do I find some solace? How do I feel a support system around me in a place that doesn't have that? And I think for me, going out, I went by the lake. It was a warm day. The sun was out. The wind was blowing. So diversifying your habits, because habits aren't going to always be there at every single time. Is it something that you do in a certain season? Is it something you do with a partner? And what habits can you do by yourself? So that's the other thing I highly suggest, is finding multiple outlets, so then you never feel like I don't have anything. And then you're just kind of left maybe doing some mindless activity, because I'll end up on a social media platform myself as well. And I think the last little bit of advice that I might impart on my own experience is understanding like what's long-term and what's short-term. So this program for me is 3 years, and that's a long arc and experience of things, but what sort of practices can I do, or what sort of achievements, or what sort of structures can I maybe refine every week, or once a month, or quarterly, that can still give me some semblance of a shorter period and some satisfaction that is not going to be until I graduate or until I finish the term. So I think that's some of the perspectives that I have for myself. And any specific questions that people may have in terms of other sort of therapies and modalities, I think we can chat about later.
Yeah, and Elizabeth, working specifically with students on adopting and keeping these practices, I wonder which practices are best in your life, which do you find are really successful for students, especially when thinking about your Better Together program that's about community and fighting loneliness of being with people. I wonder what you have to say about all of that.
Follow both of them after all of that. But I think when it comes to, and I apologize, I think my internet's a little bit wonky right now. So if I cut out, let me know. But when it comes to balance, a huge thing for me personally is, and I know that it's easier said than done, but when I'm done with work, I like make a promise to myself that I'm done. I close my laptop. I don't check my email on my phone. And now I think it's especially hard because I don't have a physical barrier between work and home. I work from home right now. And so I'm very lucky. I have an office that I can sit in and like remove myself from. Not everyone has that. So you have to find ways to like physically and mentally stop when you're actually going to take a break, similar to what Helen was saying before, and actually do something different and be intentional about that. And, so just committing, I guess, to yourself to like shutting off, shutting down. And I think that really helps me maintain balance. I think something I've seen, especially this year with students, that I've talked to and that I've worked with, is that something that has thrown off their balance and has thrown off even just their sense of like meaningfulness is not having a regular schedule and routine. And I know we've sort of talked about this already as well, but to the best of your ability. And I think as a student in general, it's tough because your days are different, right? Like Monday, Wednesday, Friday might be the same, Tuesday, Thursday might be the same, but like your days are very different. And so having like a regular schedule is really difficult. But to the best of your ability, planning your week as best you can and trying to stick to it can help you maintain some semblance of like balance. And I think especially now when that gets thrown off, people sort of just feel like they're floating, and that never feels good. And so it just helps really ground you to do that. So I think that has helped a lot of the students that I've worked with, is just trying to keep just a regular schedule. As simple as it sounds, it can be really meaningful. I think also in terms of balance, and I think a lot of students feel this way, a lot of us identify with what we do and we think about who we are in terms of what we do. And so trying again to sort of separate that and take a step back and think about like who you are outside of what you do, outside of your work, outside of your school, is really important in terms of, again, both balance, I think, and meaningfulness in your own life. And I think last, for me, and lately, I will admit it has been exceedingly difficult, but I try really hard to just maintain a practice of gratitude, because it truly just helps me see what and who I have in my life and who and what I have in this moment to be grateful for, because sometimes life sucks and like things are hard and like crap gets thrown at you. And if you focus on the bad, it can really like pull you down. And so trying as best you can to focus on what you're grateful for just gives me so much perspective on the good and the meaningful things in life. And to go back to your question about Better Together, connections are so important. And they're one of the most important things to me, which is why I've tried so hard to help students find connections. I think all students at the University of Chicago struggle at times with making connections, meeting new people, finding meaningful connections. I think graduate students, especially because we have a very siloed institution and oftentimes people are in labs doing work by themselves or, are just really focused on what they're doing. It's difficult to find meaningful connections. Or if you're, you're only going to be in a program for 2 years. And so I think some people even struggle with, do I want to invest my time in connections, knowing that in a couple years, I might not have that anymore. But I know for me personally, connections have been just the most important thing in my life. And I think they help you when you are feeling off balance, or, they help you find meaning in life. And so for me, that's just really important. And it's been really great to see some of the connections that people have made in this program. It's been really great for me to see. So I hope that answered your question.
No, it definitely does. And I think connection and relationships have become even more important in the scope of the pandemic. I think that's one thing that maybe people have learned, that that's one very meaningful part of our lives. When everything else crumbles, that's the most important thing to maintain. Yeah, I so appreciate all of your comments. I hope this was as helpful for everyone else as it was for me. So at this point, I'd love to transition into a kind of Q&A. It looks like Anna kicked us off with a really great one. I'll just read it. She posted in the chat for anyone to see, but it says, with regard to building habits and keeping routines and protecting playtime, how do you recommend maintaining a sense of flexibility or spontaneity? I especially struggle with balancing my pre-planned schedule of breaks and work with spontaneous invites from friends. That is huge. I agree with that. So any of you that would like to take that, go for it.
I've been thinking about this so much this year, in part because I just started a new position at East Carolina about 6 months before the shutdown. So maybe like some of you guys, I didn't quite have enough time to make in-person friends that are, close friendships. I find in my adult life of moving every 2 years for postdocs and appointments that it takes about 12 to 18 months to make really good friends. This is just my experience. And you have to get lucky, right? You have to find someone you have a connection with, and you have to be able to see them regularly enough to build trust. So now I'm sort of so thirsty for any opportunity to do social stuff on the one hand, but I'm also finding it more and more important to protect routine for mental health reasons. So I think about this a lot, and here's what I would say. A couple of guiding principles. First of all, remember that rules are there for order and comfort, and rules feel awesome to break every once in a while. So in terms of balancing spontaneity and routine, I would think of it that way. The routine is your rule. It's your baseline. It's how you know everything's fine. And in thinking about routines, one of the most helpful things someone has said to me about this is treat your body like a dog. Your dog needs to be walked every day, a couple times a day. Your dog needs to be fed at the same time. It's going to bark at you if you don't do it, right? Treat your body like a dog. You love dogs, treat it like a dog. And so that needs to be the baseline. Your routine is the default for every week. When you're planning your week out, it doesn't have to look exactly the same, but your bedtime is around 10. You're getting up around 7, whatever it is, you have it as the skeletal structure, the scaffolding of your life. That makes it a lot more fun to have a spontaneous invitation and decide, you know what? We're going to do it. We're going to go nuts. I know that there are some times and places and communities in which you get so many of those invitations that it can feel like every day is another opportunity to break the rule. And that's when the second thing I was going to suggest comes into play. And I don't know how well this will work for you, but it's worked really well for me at my career stage, which is to have, stay with me, to have a mission statement for your life stage. I'm not from the corporate world, I promise. But what I mean by this is a statement of what you're doing and why, that sort of like keeps your internal compass oriented. So for me, I was really struggling in my career stage with getting a ton of service requests. Just everyone wants the new faculty member to be on a committee or to, volunteer to recruit students. So I wrote a mission statement that sounds, I've never read it out loud. I'm going to just quickly read it to you. It's 2 sentences. I work for social justice, investigating past people's forgotten experiences while leading students in expressing compassion and integrity in the classroom. I teach scientific inquiry as a method for understanding human capabilities and building a more equitable world. My relationships, teaching and writing are mutually reinforcing. So that last bit is just kind of like, go team. But the idea of this is to connect my research to my teaching, to my service, to what's important in my life. And I can imagine, even for a student, it might sound very different, but you could do something similar. That I am here to expand my horizons, to imagine this, to change, be this change I see in my subfield. And that together might feel kind of divorced from social invitations, but when you use it as a lens, all right, here's my mission, here's what I'm doing in my life. I want to go hang out with this person who shares my values. I want to talk about my research with this person in my class. Or, you know what, maybe I can sit out on beer pong trivia tonight or whatever it is. Not that we're any of us playing beer pong right now. All right, that's it. I see we're coming close to time, so I don't want to monopolize. Anyone else want to tackle that one?
I'll just say it really briefly. For me, I think it's really important to set boundaries. So, and boundaries can also mean like when you say no, like what you are and aren't willing to do, I think is really important. And setting that for yourself, whatever that means for yourself ahead of time. I do think, and this might go against a little bit, what it means to have like a somewhat strict schedule, but I think being somewhat flexible with yourself is always important. And then just allowing forgiveness. So if you do feel like doing something different, or you do allow yourself to do something that's not on your schedule, just forgiving yourself for that and allowing yourself to do that, I think is just so important. Because I think we just get really down on ourselves. Like we're like, oh, we're going to, stick to this schedule and I'm going to be really good and really strict. And then that doesn't work and always, and that's okay. And so just allowing yourself some space and forgiveness in a way that you would other people. So I think that's just important as well.
Yeah, those are both great. I think it's so important to keep a schedule and also to allow yourself to break schedule. Well, I do want to respect everyone's time. I know this is a busy week for everyone else. Maybe take 1 or 2 more questions and then we'll wrap things up. Or maybe this was so great that there aren't questions. Who knows? Well, if that's the case, I so appreciate all of you guys coming out. Another round of applause to our panelists. We can skip the Zoom feature and do it in real life. Do you all have any final remarks? Anything else you want to add?
Oh, you guys are all doing a great job. I mean, I think, yeah, that forgiveness, that self-compassion is something, just know there's also someone else out there being like, wow, look at you guys, students at a time like this, getting it done, showing up at evening balance workshops. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I'm just going to put it out there. If any of you have questions about anything with UChicago Student Wellness, or you have questions about programs that we do, or you're interested in anything we do, my door is literally always open. My virtual door right now is always open. And so, Adrian, I don't know if you can share my email if anyone wants it, but I'm happy to chat with anyone or give you guys more information about resources that we have.
Yes, I would be happy to share your information. Lots of good programs.
I just wanted to say thank you to the panel and to Adrian and to everyone who came up and showed up this evening. I think showing up is a huge thing that we don't always commend ourselves for. And whether you took something away from this evening, even if it was just one thing, I think harnessing that, and I learned things this evening that I'm gonna integrate into my life. So I commend everyone for showing up.
And on that note, thanks for coming, guys. Have a great night.
Thank you so much, Adrienne.
Thanks, Adrienne.
Thank you guys. This was so wonderful. I really enjoyed it.
It sounds like you guys have some great resources. I love that you have a